It lies somewhere between the pit of your stomach, your racing heart, and your brain, somehow trying to keep it all together. It's an area we call the adrenaline zone.
We do have some Blue Angel modifications. Specifically, one of the most notable ones is that we have a smoke system. We can turn on that smoke on and off, and that is replaced, where we normally have a gun inside the nose. So that's actually a smoke tank for us now. We also have a stick spring. And what that does is it basically helps dampen out any oscillations that we might put inside the aircraft.
Navy Commander Brian Kesselring joined the Navy's Blue Angels flight demonstration team in September 2019. He leads the team's 6 FA Hornets through high-precision maneuvers before millions of breathless spectators every year. I'm former astronaut Dr. Sandra Magnus.
And I'm retired Navy fighter pilot Admiral Sandy Winnefeld. We're two adrenaline junkies who love spending time with people who are really passionate about pushing their boundaries as far as possible.
Speaking of adrenaline, we're delighted to have Zoa Energy as this episode's sponsor.
We caught up with Brian in Pensacola, Florida, just before the kickoff of the team's 2021 season.
Boss Kesselring, welcome to the Adrenaline Zone. We'd like to give our listeners a little bit about your background and where you came from. I know you grew up in North Dakota where you were exposed to aircraft and airplanes when you were younger, but what caused you to want to become a naval aviator?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. It's an absolute honor to be here and to have a chance to talk with both of you today. With that, to kind of get back to your question, like any young guy in the 80s growing up in an agricultural state like North Dakota, I think a lot of influence in aviation has to do with crop dusters, no doubt about it. We, seeing them zip around and all over the fields and over power lines, under power lines at times. And then also we had a guard unit that was a F-16 unit called the Happy Hooligans at the time that was very motivating to watch and see those aircraft. My dad spent a couple years in the Navy and always talked to me about aviation. He said the best naval aviators, or best aviators for that matter, are in the Navy. And the first time I ever had a chance to see them was going to the Fargo Air Show back in 1986. And I can still remember, back in June before internet and all these things, in June 1986, and watching these 6 blue and gold spaceships invade my hometown of Fargo, North Dakota, called the Blue Angels. And at that time, it was led by Captain Gil Rude, another North Dakota native. And I can remember the announcer ad-libbing and saying, "From the right, North Dakota's very own." And I, as a 9-year-old, I perked up my ears and go, "What? Somebody from North Dakota could potentially do that?" And I remember seeing Fat Albert and all the crew chiefs and the maintainers and watching that professionalism that they exuded each and every day. And that was really the catalyst for not only to fly, but also to maybe have that chance to join that team, the Navy and Marine Corps team. I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell, at least the genesis of my dream to fly.
Did it ever dawn on you as you were starting on this journey that you might actually one day lead the Blue Angels or even be a member?
It never did, sir. I'll tell you, I was happier than could be flying gray jets off the pointy end of an aircraft carrier, and to have the ability to go back to that is an honor as well for me. But as I got done with my commanding officer tour, I just looked at it. I had a couple friends who had been on the Blue Angels and talked to me about it, and I thought of it as, one, I thought it'd be a neat job to do, to be able to work with professionals that influenced me so profoundly at such a young age, but to also to be able to give back. And as you get older, especially in the Navy, and I guess as getting a middle-aged man, you start thinking about what are ways, given my capabilities, that I can give back and potentially influence in a good way those around me. And to have an influence like the Blue Angels had on me was something that was intriguing for me. And lucky enough for me, they picked my application. I'm guessing they probably picked the wrong one in the pile, but I'll take it. I'm still here and had the ability to come on and join this fine team.
It's funny. Every one of us that gets chosen for astronaut, we have that same thought. It's like, are they sure? Are they sure? Yeah. So I want to go back to the 9-year-old that had that dream watching the air show. Did you take pilot lessons as a high school person, a high school student? Did you take training in the Navy? What sort of steps did you have to go through to get to that highest level where you are now as the lead of the Blue Angels?
Well, I'll tell you, man, I think one of the things that it was just a passion. And I go back to even being 6 or 7 years old, and I just had some passion that was about seeing these aircraft and wanting to be in them. I never had a chance to actually fly them until I got to college and did some work study programs and some work at night to be able to pay for some flight lessons over a couple of years to get my private pilot's license. And that was really when I started flying. But as a kid growing up, I was just interested. You know, you read some pilot magazines and flying and some of those magazines that are aviation centric, and just nothing more than, you know, building some model airplanes or watching something that comes across on the TV or renting a VHS video from the video store back in the day and seeing what this aviation thing was all about.
So, boss, tell us a little bit about how a pilot actually becomes a Blue Angel. You know, you got to go out to the fleet, develop a reputation, but there's quite a process there. I know it's different for team members and the boss, but give us a sense for what it takes to get onto the team.
Yes, sir. It's, you know, first and foremost, we're from the fleet and we're going back to the fleet, as you well know. We, you know, in our careers, for a boss to be picked up here at right at about the 18 to 20 year mark in your career, the black and white requirement is that you've led a tactical squadron and you have over 3,000 hours in tactical aircraft. And that's about it. And then from there, in the boss hiring process, a lot of it is just interviews and certainly reputation, but ultimately what it comes down to is just interviewing with a lot of former bosses and leadership in the Navy to see if, one, you have the aptitude flying-wise, but perhaps more importantly, to be able to come in here and to synchronize well with this high-functioning team. For other teammates, our support officers and our other pilots, it's a very similar process. Now, they join the team at about, now on the officer side, at about probably somewhere between the 6 to 10 year mark, depending on exactly what position they're filling. For the aviators, they're required to have about 1,250 hours of tactical jet experience, similar hours for C-130 pilots flying Fat Albert, as we like to call our C-130J. And throughout that process, we look at what their qualifications were in the fleet. We talk to all the folks as points of reference. We see how they filled out their application, how they answered basic questions of how they view the world, how they view the career, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and how they view working on a team. And ultimately, what it comes down to, like any other thing out there in the Navy and Marine Corps, is they take a look at and try to take the best and most fully qualified for the team. And on top of that, we have to make sure that they're great, you know, not only great individuals and great individual officers and enlisted sailors and Marines, but great teammates. Well, that's a key thing for us. 2 key traits that I think if you take out the flying expertise or the expertise for any of our support roles, key traits is we got to be able to trust you, and attitude of absolute humility.
This sounds remarkably similar to the process that I went through, especially being able to be a part of a team. And, you know, I suppose you guys have some basic training that you put everyone through to integrate them into the bigger team, whether it's for the aviators or the ground support. And is there sort of a probationary period there, or do they jump right in?
There is, and it slightly depends on exactly what position you're filling, of course, and what exact role you have on the team. We call it our newbie phase. And I'll give you an example of 4 officers. They'll be selected, you know, your average officer is selected about early July. They have about a couple months to report down here. And the officers, as an example, we pick up this year will come down and report basically the first week of September. And for 2 to 2.5 months during that newbie phase, they are just being indoctrinated in how our organization works. They're not looking particularly at flying or taking over a job. They're literally just sitting back and they're observing how this machine of the Blue Angels works. Once they, what we call drop a salute or the change of command or the end of the season, because we end each of our flight demonstrations with a team salute for the pilots. At the end of that demonstration, they are now the team members who are enter the next phase. And from pretty much that first week of November until the middle of March, our first opportunity for an air show, we go through a pretty rigorous training cycle. It starts out with, you know, the very basics. By mid-March, we're executing an air show and up to not only the safety standards that we have at this team, but also the level of excellence that we've come to expect from the Blue Angels in their last 75 years. Wow.
So, you know, one of the things that I think we have as a singular advantage, not only in naval aviation, but in tactical jet aviation and the U.S. military writ large is that we're very self-critical. We have very candid briefs and debriefs. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, you're out in El Centro, you're sort of working your way up, walk before you run, and how you go about that process?
So I'm glad you touched on that. And that is, to me, that is, you know, strike fighter or naval aviation in a nutshell, is that that environment of critical self-assessment. And that is the absolute key. I think for the critical self-assessment, I think we start out and give an overview of our flight. Starting out, we go to El Centro and we start our brief in the morning. We get in the spaces about 5:45. We take all the learning points that we took from the last day and that is our starting point for our flight that day. We're going to brief them. We all have individual learning points and learning points that we have as a group. We take that into our flight. We execute that flight for about an hour, and then we come back down and we just dissect it and rip it apart for the next hour, an hour and a half. I think one of the cool things about this organization is also that there's no pride, there's no ego, rather, not necessarily pride, but there's no ego in the debrief, where the person who's critiquing me as the most senior aviator in the room is a couple lieutenants when I show up, and they're telling me, hey, you did this wrong, boss. You did this wrong. You moved your wings here. This wasn't synced up the way it should be. And that's the environment that we operate in. And we have to operate in that particular way in this environment where the tolerances are so tight.
After this short break, we'll talk to Brian about the teamwork required to fly the complex maneuvers the Blue Angels regularly perform while making it all look easy. What if you could get energy, immunity, and strength in one sip? Well, now you can.
ZOA is the fastest growing energy drink on the market, created by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to fuel risk takers and world changers like you.
ZOA is packed with superfoods like camu camu and acerola cherries that provide multiple B vitamins and 100% vitamin C. Plus, ZOA has just the right kick of caffeine from green tea and green coffee in 5 amazing flavors.
Look for it on Amazon, at your favorite retailer, or order online at zoaenergy.com. That's ZOA energy.com. Other than those kinds of intense briefing and, that honesty and trust you guys develop, what are other ways? That's a way to manage risk and make sure you continue on the path of a learning organization so you get better and better. What are some of the other ways that you guys are managing the risk? I mean, it's kind of risky what you're doing, flying so many airplanes at, such high speeds so close together.
Yeah, we talk about it's unforgiving. It's an unforgiving business, and we mitigate risk by having a really stair-step approach to how we approach every flight. And we don't get to our lowest altitudes or what we call our closest sets, the closest that we'll fly our aircraft to together, until the very end of the season. And so we get to a level our first goal is to achieve a level of safety in any maneuver before we do it, before we take it to the next level. So we're not going to even start doing a maneuver until we figure out that at a certain spacing away from each other, until we figure out we can do everything up until that point safely. And ultimately our mission is to go out there and execute flight demonstrations in front of the public. And if we're not doing it safely, we're not really not doing it well.
So, boss, tell us a little bit about flying in formation at the individual level. There's nothing, as you know better than I, more rewarding than flying smoothly on somebody's wing when you have a really good flight lead. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you fly formation, and especially when you do it with 4 or 6 aircraft flying so closely together?
It's an interesting thing. And I'll tell you and it's interesting you ask that question, because when I got here, I don't think I really appreciate how we did it, because ultimately the goal in the Blue Angels is not necessarily to fly 6 jets and do spectacular maneuvers individually. It's to fly 6 jets as one. And there's a mechanical, there's a physics element to that, and there's a psychological element to that. How do we synchronize these 6 different people in a way that we can fly 6 jets as one? And a lot of that goes into how we fly, right? We have everything that we do. And as a flight lead, everything I do inside the jet is prefaced with a cadence. So I'll say a few words, and that has a certain tempo to it. And the way I say those words, the volume I say them at, will mean something to all of my wingmen. And we have to have the trust between each other to, when I say a word like a little pull, that I'm not going to pull back on that stick until I say the P and pull. And all 6 of us are going to do it at the same time, because if we don't do that and we're close together, we're probably not going to like the results of that. Same thing with any turn, power addition, slowing down, speeding up. And you can just take that to the next level as the maneuvers get more and more complex. So it's a really neat thing once you do it well, or for that moment you find yourself doing it well in the midst of a maneuver, and you find that you really have synced up that entire team, that whole delta that we call the 6-plane formation. It's a really neat feeling to be able to do that. But it really goes down to that trust and that repetition of doing things over and over and over, to where you know the people inside of that formation so well that you know exactly what that word means, when it's going to happen. And heck, on top of that, it also means you know when they're having a good day and a bad day just by the way you see them when they walk in the morning, or how they sound on the radio. You can tell how somebody's doing when you fly with them up to 15, 16 times a week together. You get a pretty good idea of how they're doing and how they're feeling the jet and where they're at.
Well, Brian, you're probably too humble to say this, but most of us watch that beautiful Blue Angel diamond going across the sky and say, "Oh, okay, that looks good," but they don't necessarily have an appreciation for how terribly important it is that you have a smooth flight lead that everybody can sync up on. So, pretty amazing.
Absolutely. One of the metrics I put out there is a 1 degree angle of bank change is about 4.5 inches of movement at the end of my wingtip. And when our closest sets, we get in upwards of 18 inches away. So if you move your wings, a couple degrees, you might find yourself, and they're at a slightly out of position, you could find yourself in a real tough spot real quick. So smoothness and consistency down to those very, very tight tolerances are something that we have to have a safe demo.
You mentioned, and I understand this because being on a space crew, you get to know your crewmates really well. You know, it's like having another set of siblings, right? You just can read them so well. So do you change the way you lead the team based on your read of how people might be feeling that day or how they might be approaching the day?
Well, I think certainly we do. And I think one of the things about the flight demonstration is, much like one of the adages we use in naval aviation, is there's no rank in the cockpit. And there's, right is right. And if somebody's, wrong, you can find yourself dead wrong very quickly, airborne, or just having a bad plan. So getting an idea of where people are at each and every day and then adjusting as required is something we do, day to day. And in fact, inside of the demo, it could be maneuver by maneuver. We go out there and we have a game plan. We find that maybe we're not synchronized as well today. Maybe we'll go ahead and make those sets just a little bit further apart, or maybe just there's enough turbulence that are out there or wind shifts that we just don't like what we're seeing. So we're going to have to make that shift based upon personal performance or environmentals.
Do you have any modifications made to the Super Hornets that you're using for the Blue Angels, or are they pretty similar to what's out in the fleet?
We do have some Blue Angel modifications. Specifically, one of the most notable ones is that we have a smoke system, and that we can turn on that smoke on and off, and that is replaced. Where we'd normally have a gun inside the nose. That's actually a smoke tank for us now. We also have a stick spring, and what that does is it basically helps dampen out any oscillations that we might put inside the aircraft by getting jostled around in turbulence and all that. So we have a constant, almost 40 pounds forward stick pressure that we're holding against, and when we're flying that aircraft. And that's one of the more notable differences for us, is that ends up to wear you out pretty good if you're flying that, especially when you first start flying these aircraft. They kind of wear out your arm a little bit.
Yeah.
People maybe don't have an appreciation for that. 40 pounds of pressure actually allows you to make finer corrections, right?
It does. It does. And the way that we fly it is a little bit different. As an example, once I get off the ground and into the air is the boss position, I can't touch my rudders because it would induce some yaw and some things that wingmen would want like to fly off. So I have my feet flat on the deck, and I'm kind of hunched down in kind of a pseudo-fetal position, anchored down and in kind of a semi-flexed position the whole time to make sure that I can anchor down and hold a very smooth and steady stick. And our wingmen do something very similar. They use their rudders to fly formation, but a very similar kind of stance inside of the cockpit to make sure that have great control over the stick and throttles and are minimizing movement.
You bring up an interesting point. I had to learn to fly T-38s backseat when I joined the astronaut corps, which was great fun because I never anticipated I'd get to do something like that. But I was surprised at the physicality involved in flying to the points you just made. And I found, clenching different parts of my body, not even thinking about it. And just it's not something people think about. And you guys are in that plane a lot. So that takes a wear and tear on you, I'd imagine.
We are, and it's really more for us. I don't know if there's a wear and tear. There certainly is, but we have, our G tolerance. We don't wear a G suit inside as the Blue Angels with, that anti-G straining maneuver that we do to kind of force that blood back up into our head so we don't have a G-induced loss of consciousness is absolutely critical for us. So we don't have that extra added layer of protection. So what we do is make sure that we get some extra training and really get in the weight room, some cardio, make sure we're in a top physical condition so that we can go out there and that anti-G straining maneuver to make sure that we can see clearly, think clearly throughout the entirety of the demo is absolutely critical. So that's one thing we do. We also every year go back into the centrifuge, which, as you guys are familiar with, and get swung around there for an entire day, which is just an absolute blast, kind of.
Well, and that doesn't even mention the fact that your solos sometimes are pulling, up to minus 4 Gs in some of their maneuvers, I guess?
They do. They can go up to -3. We've tried to eliminate some of the negative G just to save our airframes, because ultimately what it's about is we want zero impact on the fleet Navy aircraft in the fleet. We don't want to wear these out any sooner than we absolutely would have to. So we're going to look to be good stewards of our aircraft. We look to minimize some of those negative G profiles, but they certainly can pull or push some negative Gs in the cockpit and up to 7.5 Gs positive.
Tell us a little bit about the rhythm of a season. How many shows do you do? And what's a typical week like for the team?
Well, that's a great question. And what we'll do is our Mondays are off, but we'll come in on a Tuesday. We'll practice. We'll brief up what the next air show is going to look like after that practice. We'll practice again on Wednesday, get ready, load up everything so it's ready to go early on a Thursday morning. And then we go to our next show site. Our C-130 will get loaded up. I'll load up our crew of maintainers that are heading out and our support officers probably about 5 to 6 in the morning. They get there. The Delta, our 6 planes of F-18s, get there about an hour afterwards. We go into our first flight of the day on show site, which is called a circles, where we get over, head the field or the show site that we're at. We take a look at our visual checkpoints. We land. We brief it up. We debrief it and then brief up our next flight, which is a practice. So on our third flight is our first practice overhead of show site. And then we kind of wrap things up then. Usually we're done about 1900 or 7 p.m. at night. We run back to our hotel rooms, grab a bite to eat, and then get ready to do things again. In a normal year, certainly COVID is precluding some of this. We would do commits, what we call them, and those are just engagements with our team members at high schools and hospitals to engage with that community, to spread our message to them. After that, we have a Friday practice. We wrap it up with probably a dinner that night or one night to kind of relax a little bit. And then we do everything on our Saturday and Sunday shows, which is a very similar schedule where we go up and we have our air show on Saturday. We have a commitment at that night for the local community, typically. We wake up Sunday, check out of our hotels, execute our air show on Sunday. We get done with that. We get ready to brief up our flight. We come back home to Pensacola. And we stay in our hangar in Pensacola till about 2000. We debrief the flight of our last air show demo on Sunday and go home and get ready for our day off by doing our laundry and buying some groceries and get ready to do it again for the next show season, next show side.
And how many weeks in a row do you guys do this over the summer?
We start our show season typically mid-March, and it goes through probably the first week of November. Usually average right around 33 air shows a year. And we found that probably the best way to do this is break that up a little bit just for the risk management consideration and the fatigue management factors. We break that up, and every 6 to 8 weeks, we'll take a off week. And what that off week will entail is we'll just come back to Pensacola on that week and we'll practice locally that week and take the weekend off and then do it again. But it's a pretty rigorous schedule once we get done with El Centro. And certainly El Centro, that winter training regimen is pretty arduous out there as well. But one of the good things is that intense training regimen allows our team to not only bond, but knock out and establish those skill sets and resilience that's so critical throughout an entire show season.
Yeah, that is definitely pretty intense. And even I can imagine, thinking about what's going on in a show, thinking about you're in the cockpit and you're in the middle of a show, you're leading a diamond that is flying unbelievably close to you. And I remember when we were doing formation flying in T-38, that was incredibly mentally demanding. And so here you are coordinating an entire team. You've got a lot of data coming at you. You're in a high-speed aircraft. And what's going on in your head and what are you thinking?
As the boss.
Yeah.
As the boss, I would say that, I've flown quite a bit. And I'll tell you, from startup to shutdown, it is maximum intensity as far as focus. And I think a lot of the former bosses would probably say that as well, is really in that kind of 45 minutes, it is 100% focus on the task at hand. And that sounds, and you're basically dedicating all your brain power to that. And I don't know how else to describe it other than that's all you're thinking about. And it is 100% focus, and it's about as intense as it could be there. Now, things that I am thinking about is thinking about the environmental factors, whether it be how the air density could affect my turn radius, the winds. Typically, every show site, it's still done outside, looking at checkpoints, right? Because we're thinking about turns, our angle of bank in terms of a degree, or the G's that we're pulling in terms of a tenth of a G affecting our profile. So any nav aids we have in the cockpit are just insufficient to have that level of precision. So what we do before each show site is study roughly 30 checkpoints. We pick out 30 things on the ground that we use that kind of, as a boss thinks about them, as kind of connecting the dots, as things that I'll use to reference and line up on and establish my profile so that I can present the best formation as possible to the crowd.
So you have kind of a three-dimensional picture of the whole airspace in your mind, and you're flying sort of like dot to dot to dot almost.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you think the most difficult maneuver is for either the Diamond or the two solos as you guys work on these air shows?
Shoot, I would say probably the Diamond 360, and that's just our Diamond pass. It just looks like a left turn, but we're in there, and the tolerances are so tight. We usually bring that one to our closest set, and when that Diamond comes around, you'll see that all flight controls are all overlapped. You'll see the wingtips are very, very close apart between our right and left wingmen. You'll have my canopy of my slot pilot be right underneath and kind of between those wingtips, and we are about a sandwich as close as you can get together as possible. And for us, that is almost like a max repetition if you were in a weight room kind of effort. And everybody in there is what we'll call fulcrumed out. And what that means is basically you're almost a maximum flex to make sure that any jostling that the environmentals may do to your aircraft does not affect how you put that input whatsoever. So once I lock in that angle of bank and that rate of descent and that throttle setting, it's almost like we're in a max flex at that point until we're out of that maneuver to make sure that nobody is moving because any wingtip movement could be a bad thing.
Just for our listeners' sake, and please elaborate on this, but I know when I was practicing as a complete novice, mind you, doing formation flying just off a T-38, I was focused on the wingtip. And so your wing aviators are focused on your plane, and they're not focused on these three-dimensional sites that you're using to guide the team, right?
Absolutely. And it's one of the coolest things about this team. And, the demonstration is absolutely analogous to everything else that goes on our team. We're a lean organization, and my right wingman is looking at and focused on only things that a right wingman should be focused on, right? He's looking at my wingtip. He's looking at the alignment with my fuselage. He's making sure his wings are matched with mine. He's looking at the depth. And he's, staring at the side of my head as he's doing this and making sure that he's in the exact same position. Same thing with my left wingman, a different viewpoint and different mechanics is required. Each of their mechanics are actually slightly different just based upon how the airflows interact. They actually have different mechanics and different rudder and stick inputs required for each of them. And our airborne safety observer, if you were to call him that, our slot pilot is also out there flying off of my aircraft, but he's also making sure that the wingtips from the right and left wingman don't get too close. So he's got a scan there too, where he's making sure that as they have slight deviations, he's making sure their wingtips aren't getting too close, or he's not getting too close to their wingtip and all that. So he's monitoring our formation, how we are flying together.
Yeah. So for our listeners, you guys are flying basically as one organism where you are the brain and everybody is just sort of, I don't want to say blindly, but focused on following where you're going. So your role is super important for the safety really of the whole group.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's they're focused on there. And I think about it in terms of our, we have a maneuver called the line abreast loop. And it's where we have 5 aircraft that are looking straight across, and all the wingmen are flying off me at that maneuver, but their scan is over their shoulder. So all they're doing is they can just see over their shoulder and trying to line up the formation both in depth and forward and aft movement. And That's a great example of what you're talking about. Just like the Diamond 360, where I can't get low, right? It's too much at stake by doing that. So everybody's got a role that's important. Their role is not to hit me. My role is to make sure we don't hit the ground and fly a good profile, right?
So I would have guessed, boss, that for the Diamond, that Blue Angel number 4, if you is on the inside of an echelon, if you're rolling into him, that's probably a pretty tough formation flying challenge, right? Because you're the axle and he's at the end of the wheel, but he's having to do sort of negative G to stay in formation, right? It's a tough move.
Yes, sir. That's a difficult one. And the start of what we've kind of tweaked that maneuver this year, so you can see it. We call it a changeover roll now. We start out in a left echelon and we roll left, which means, just as you're saying, the number 4 pilot has to push forward on the stick and then give some rudder and power to make sure he can stay on the outside of that turn. We're kind of turning about him. So that's amazing. So it's a very difficult. And then on top of that, he's trying to maintain all of the aircraft in a straight line and kind of maintain that position. So this year we've upped the complications, I guess, a little bit. We've taken that, what used to be just an echelon roll, and now we're going to start the first half of that maneuver in echelon. And as we approach inverted, our 4 pilot will tell them to go diamond, and they'll make a formation shift halfway through that roll while we continuously roll back to our diamond formation, so that we have it with about 90 degrees left of that roll, we'll present a diamond to the formation. So that's pretty cool.
Spectacular.
As a spectator, it seems like the most difficult move is when all 6 jets are together in the fleur-de-lis, and then you break apart vertically and then all come together from different directions at the show center. That looks pretty dynamic and scary as someone watching the show. Is that difficult for you guys?
Those are difficult in the sense that, everybody's, I think the way we brief it a lot of times in our formation is that everybody has to do their max effort to do their individual role to make sure that synchronizes up. There's so many variables on a maneuver like the fleur-de-lis or the loop break cross, where everybody spreads out after a loop, breaks out over center point, and then does a half Cuban 8, and then tries to cross in a stacked formation right at center point on time, on airspeed. That is a difficult one, because all it takes is one person to be a little off that day, and all of a sudden the stack doesn't look perfect. So very difficult, and that's one of the maneuvers that we integrate last into our show sequence as we go throughout winter training, because it has all those elements of flying together in formation and then rejoining from that formation from a very dynamic maneuver.
Yeah.
Dynamic individual maneuvers, that is.
As a reminder, this episode of the Adrenaline Zone is brought to you by ZOA Energy. ZOA is designed to support healthy immunity while providing a boost of energy and hydration. And you can always find out more on zoaenergy.com. So it's not only skilled formation flying, it's also a lot of timing involved that is not easy to do in that 3-dimensional environment. Can you give our listeners a sense for how you're communicating during a show? If I remember correctly, you've got a frequency where you're talking to the diamond, but you've also got the solos who have to communicate with each other. They're doing some very interesting things, together. Can you give us a sense for how that rhythm works?
Absolutely. We really have kind of 3 entities, I would say, in a show site. We have our ground support personnel, and that's headed up by typically our maintenance officer, who's watching those maneuvers, who's got safety observers that are down there communicating. He, in this case, Lieutenant Brian Abe, he's got the ability to communicate in all frequencies. He probably communicates the least, but monitors the most frequencies. Actually, airborne in the demo, we have a frequency that we use on the show line. So anytime that we find ourselves basically in for a maneuver and then leaving the air show or the aerobatic box, basically in front of the crowd, that's a common frequency that we use. We also have an individual frequency for just the diamond, and we have an individual frequency that the solos use. And it's very important that we know we're transmitting on the right frequency at the right time and saying the right words. We have a script, but that script has differences, and the differences in it are not necessarily the words, but the differences in the script that we use are the intonation, volume, the rate at which we say words. And that's a way that we can pack more information into a phrase that means more to our wingman.
Tell me, have you ever flown a perfect show? Would you consider you guys have ever flown a perfect show? There's so many variables involved that you've been explaining to us.
No, I think it's not necessarily that we'd ever will fly a perfect show. I'm of a different mindset that you can achieve some level of perfection. I know there's the relentless pursuit of perfection that we also dedicate ourselves to. But I think we do achieve moments. There will be a moment, and I'm talking, it might be a second or two. We're in the middle of a delta roll, and you can just feel it. We went off there. The aircraft is stable. I have some mirrors in the cockpit where I can just see the stability of the aircraft. I know I haven't given I've given good inputs so that I've given a good platform for my wingmen to show their true skills, the real skilled people in this is the wingmen, to show off their capabilities. And for a moment, you can see that stasis, or we can find ourselves rolling as one, and it's addictive. You know what I mean? If you achieve it that second or two, I can still think about those moments that we've had, and it's addictive, and you constantly chase it. And throughout this team, and whatever the role is, whether you're maintaining an aircraft, whether you're in our support, your logistics, whether you're working on the ground, public affairs, administration, or whether you're actually flying the demo, everybody has that mentality of waking up each and every day going, man, I'm going to chase perfection today. I want to taste it. I want to get there. I want to dedicate myself to excellence. And it sounds like I'm speaking in platitudes. I know when I say that. But when folks in this organization, we hire for those folks that no kid and wake up every day and say, you know what, I am glad to be here, and I'm going to get after it today, and I'm going to give my absolute utmost to attain, excellence, and maybe I can get to perfection, if but for a moment, whether it be in the demonstration or their particular role inside of this organization, achieve perfection for that moment.
Boss, Naval Aviation does a tremendous job of managing risk, but how about stress? Naval Aviation also talks about stress management. How, in a pretty high pressure job you've got, how do you handle that risk personally?
Well, I think like anybody else in their job, you find your battle rhythm, right? My core unit ultimately comes down to my family, my beautiful wife and daughter, and I got another daughter on the way here in 2 months, so I'm excited for that. But you got to have that core, and you got to have that touchstone, which I believe starts at home, and starts with your health, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, whatever your belief structure is. And I kind of think those are the three cornerstones. I guess it would be a three-walled house if it's three cornerstones, but those are the three key areas that a person needs to focus on, right? And whatever it is for said individual, for me, it would be, kind of the mental health is finding an outlet. I think like a lot of folks who are high performing folks that love what they do, are passionate about what they do, they need to find a way to detach themselves from it with something else. For me, it's reading. I might be listening to podcasts. Might be listening to books on tape. On top of that, I think my mental and physical health are inextricably linked to where I need to get some PT in every day. That's just something that I need to do. And on top of that, I need to make sure that I get some sleep. I no kid and force myself. I think a lot of folks, and when they're really passionate about what they're doing, end up cutting it short on sleep. This is a job where if you cut yourself short on sleep, you're going to find yourself on the backside of the power curve real quick and not performing to your utmost. And then last but not least, the spiritual side or the family side of that, that's really where that needs to be healthy as well. And for me, it's just being able to interact and spend that quality time when I can with my family. And those 3 points are the ones that really allow me to walk into this organization, to walk into this hangar each and every day, and to be able to give my utmost and perform at a level that hopefully allow my wingmen to show off those fantastic skill sets and talents that they have, as well as the rest of the organization.
So, boss, as we start to wind down here a little bit, one of the cool things that not an awful lot of people get to see at an air show is that the precision starts when you all actually man up your airplanes. And it's quite a neat thing to watch. But do you all have any other sort of team rituals, either before or after you do a show to kind of cement things? Or is it just get in the jet and go?
Oh, sure. No doubt about it. I would say that every day is filled with the same level, darn near the whole day is filled with a lot of those rituals and things that we do. We do things in a very, very specific Blue Angel way. No kidding, as we, our maintainers have a certain battle rhythm that they do, how they show up, how they execute things, motivational things that they do to get themselves. If it's nothing more than when they're turning the jets in the morning, they say things in a certain way, and it sounds probably like chants or things that are mantras that they might say and take part in. That is very similar to how we do the demonstration. Our day, when we start off our brief, no kidding, we have rituals that start off, and everybody shall be in the spaces, 1 hour prior to our flight demonstration taking place. 10 minutes prior to it, everybody shall be in the briefing room. 5 minutes prior, we shall be in our seat. 1 minute prior, there shall be absolute silence inside the briefing room prior to kicking it off. And everything we say is very scripted. It's reactive and dynamic to the different factors, but it is very scripted as we go through this brief. Inside of our brief, we'll chair fly. We'll do a thing called pen flying, where I'll talk through the entire maneuver sequence together. In part, during that pen flyer, we'll basically mission rehearse. And what we'll do is we'll take a time, we'll pick a couple maneuvers during the course of that brief. We'll all move our chairs back. We'll get in a flight position to the most as we can represent it inside of our chair that we're sitting at that time. Close our eyes and visualize. Now go through all the communications and at the cadence that we'll do. Everybody go through the throttle and stick positions, rudder movements that they would do during that maneuver. And then we'll do that a couple times throughout our brief. And from that brief time all the way forward to when we walk out to sign for our jets, how we do things, where we put our covers on, where we put our sunglasses, or how as we call them, the shades, they're all synchronized from start to finish.
I do have a quick question. Do you guys use simulators in any of your training?
We do. With the Super Hornet, one of the things that was pretty cool about our transition to the Super Hornet is up in Pax River, we have a simulator that can now be modified to include putting on the stick spring and some of the modifications that we use, whether in the aircraft, to go up and do some basic trainings. Now, a lot of the training you can't totally replicate, because a lot of it, no kidding, is seat of the pants, and you have to have kind of that feel for the jet. But one thing that's amazing is, and we talk about the safety aspect of it, is we can now go in there and we can put somebody flying on a formation that can record my flight profile for a maneuver. And let's take an example. We're up on a loop, and I can give somebody an engine failure mid-maneuver, and we can actually practice some of those failures in a very realistic environment and go through repetition after repetition to make sure that we can get it right in the worst case scenario and still have that safe show for us. So that's one thing that's been really cool for us to do this year with the Super Hornet.
You bring up a good point, because we didn't talk about what happens if you're in the middle of a tight formation and you've got airplane problems. That's significant.
And it's one of those things that, much like in naval aviation, both Navy, Marine Corps, each and every brief we talk about, whether it be something we call NATOPS, basically what's something about technical about the aircraft we can talk about, or an emergency procedure. And then once a month, we'll even go down and we brief a scenario and put somebody on the spot and say, they'll say, hey, boss, you just had an engine failure in your bullseye nose high in the diamond dirty loop. What are you going to do? And they say, you got it. And then I go through the communications. I talk through the emergency procedures with our ground personnel who back us up with all the manuals and the emergency procedures. And I talk through our flight, all the wingmen as well. And once we get done with that, we talk about how we could have done it better and more effective and more efficient.
So, Brian, I thought you guys were so close that if you have an engine failure, the other guys are having an engine failure too.
There are formations where it's a lot less forgiving. We try to make sure that, perfect world that we can, do we ever achieve protection? Maybe not, but in a perfect world, we find ourselves with a way out, or if we can recognize it early enough, we can make sure that everything is, we can still safely get away and safely recover all of our aircraft and be no factor to each other as well as the spectators.
I guess that's why the maintenance team has to be top notch, because you really don't want that happening at all.
Absolutely.
Boss, is there anything we should have asked you that we didn't ask?
Well, shoot,
we covered an awful lot.
Oh, shoot, we covered a lot of ground. Certainly, I tell you, I'm super appreciative, and I'm among giants here as I'm talking to them. And absolutely honored and humbled to be able to talk to both of you with absolutely fantastic careers and careers that are continuing on in different facets. So it is humbling and honored to be here to talk to you and to spread the message of the Blue Angels. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, sir, we're here to represent over 800,000 active duty, reserve, and civilian support personnel for the Navy and Marine Corps that are out there doing the great work to protect the freedoms that we hold so dear each and every day. And one thing I can't emphasize enough is that we're from the fleet and we're going back to the fleet. So again, I'm humbled and honored to lead this organization. I still pinch myself and go, why did they pick, or I can't believe they picked me, but you know what? I'll enjoy it while I'm here. And last but not least, the way that I view my job as the boss, so that we focused on some of the flight leader mechanics here stuff today, or the commanding officer side of this job. I view that what I do in this team is nothing more than to to go out there and allow this team to do the things what it does. It does so well. At most, I set the ceiling performance on any flight demonstration, or on the ground personnel, allow them to do the things that they can do so well and show their fine talents. So thanks again for having me here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, let me tell you, it's been a real honor for us. I speak for Sandra in saying this and having the opportunity to talk to you. And congratulations again on having the dream job of every naval aviator. We really look forward to seeing you in the air sometime soon. You've got a great show scheduled this year. And thanks so much for spending time with our listeners today. You've really brought some fantastic insights that I think anybody watching the Blue Angels this year who's had a chance to listen to this podcast will really appreciate some of the nuances of what you all are doing out there. So thanks so much for what you do. That was Commander Brian Kesselring, who leads the Navy Blue Angels flight demonstration team. Many thanks to Zoa Energy, who sponsored this episode. Check them out at zoaenergy.com. Please join us back in the Adrenaline Zone next week for a new episode. If you like our show, be sure to follow us, tell your friends, and also write a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a suggestion for an adrenaline seeker we might want to interview, visit our website at theadrenalinezone.com.